we have the agreement, then we know the fate of the houseboaters.
Tonight, evictions on Yellowknife's Dene traditional territory.
Disastrous.
And we go to the Yukon, where tourism has been hit hard by COVID-19. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. At today's COVID briefing, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau showed concern over the rising cases of COVID-19, specifically in two remote communities of Pikangikum and Casablanca, who are experiencing COVID-19 outbreaks. The Prime Minister announced that 28 million rapid tests announced last week will be deployed earlier next week. It will be up to each province to decide exactly where the tests go, but actions are underway in two Northern Ontario communities that recently reported positive COVID cases.
Our government is also continuing to provide surge support on processing tests, including for Ontario. And for the First Nations communities of Casablanca and Pikangikum, National Microbiology Lab employees are on the ground with testing kits. It is vital that these communities, with cases of COVID-19, have the necessary testing capacity to control the spread of the virus and keep people safe.
The Atlantic bubble has now popped. A rise in COVID cases caused New Brunswick to close its borders to everyone except essential workers, leaving Mi'kmaq students in Quebec cut off from their high school classroom. Due to New Brunswick tightening its borders, about 100 high school students from Listigouche First Nation cannot cross the bridge from Quebec to attend classes in Campbellton, New Brunswick. For one student, she can enter into New Brunswick to work at her part-time job at Dairy Queen. Hannah Vicaire says it's not fair. However, she can sell ice cream, but not attend classes.
Yeah, it just makes me really angry that, the students aren't considered essential. If anything, we should be the first in line to be considered essential, because that's our education. They're denying our right to learn.
Quebec's Human and Youth Rights Commission is launching an investigation into the deaths of two young boys who were murdered in Wendake near Quebec City over the weekend. The two brothers, aged 2 and 5, were found dead inside of a home in the Huron-Wendat community early Sunday morning. A 30-year-old man surrendered to authorities and was charged with second-degree murder. He has not yet entered a plea. A judge also issued a publication ban to protect the children's identities. The Rights Commission says the boys' situation had been reported to Youth Protection. Grand Chief Conrad Sui says the suspect involved suffered from mental illness.
I know that that person has mental problems. That person has been violent towards his lady, and she did call the DPG, and I don't know if it failed the system or not. I'm not there to discuss that or to judge what happened. Today we're just concentrating on the two.
Late last week, the Sioux Valley Dakota Nation declared a state of emergency. The community in Manitoba has been hit by several suicides. 4 people have died in the last month. In a public letter written to Indigenous Services, Sioux Valley asked for funding to hire 4 full-time mental health care workers and support for crisis line workers. We want a healing lodge to be built to address the impacts of colonialism. Indigenous Services say they will provide $140,000 to the community, and that an emergency response team will be arriving on October 14th. And we will have more on this story later in the week. In Regina, Rocky Lonechild's lawyer has filed a statement of claim on his client's behalf. Lonechild was arrested by Regina police in December 2019. During that arrest, it's alleged that Lonechild's ribs were broken and his lung was punctured. Priscilla Wolf has the story.
This video, uploaded on social media, shows Regina Police's December 2019 arrest of Rocky Lonechild. Now, Lonechild's lawyer, Danielle LeBlanc, filed a statement of claim at the Regina Court of Queen's Bench.
It is very rare for a citizen to sue their government. We say that a citizen suing their government for police misconduct is far less extreme than the idea that police can do whatever they want without ever being held liable.
LeBlanc says he wants the courts to determine if that arrest was legal, and he wants the public to also watch the video of the arrest.
We're calling on Saskatchewan court at trial to determine whether what happened is legal. More pressingly, we're calling on the Saskatchewan public to watch the video and decide whether what happened should be legal.
The claim names the Regina police officers involved, the Regina Board of Police Commissioners, and the 3 attending EMS personnel, and the Saskatchewan Health Authority. Carmel Crowchild, who is advocating for Lonechild and his family as a spokesperson, says they recently found out Lonechild will not be facing drug possession charges. Police and EMS have said his arrest was related to crystal meth use.
Since the start of this, it was deemed that this was all on crystal meth. That Rocky was using crystal meth, was on crystal meth, and including the ambulance people had, in meetings with the Regina Quappel Health and the director of the EMS, also indicated that they were told he was on crystal meth.
Rocky Lonechild is scheduled to appear in court October 25th for charges of resisting arrest. Priscilla Wolfe, APTN National News, Regina.
An Eagle Lake First Nation great-grandmother is on day 4 of a hunger strike. She started it last week when Anishinaabe Abinogi Family Services canceled Thanksgiving weekend with her 4 great-grandchildren who are in foster care with non-Indigenous families. She says Indigenous agencies are helping to alienate children from their culture and families, and it's time they start governing themselves according to traditional ways.
And we do, as Anishinaabe people, have those laws, but when are they going to start working on it? Like this Bill C-92, there's lots of money in it, $1.4 billion for people that want to develop these protocol, but it's not happening. Meanwhile,
APTN cannot identify anyone who could identify any children in care. Still, with Child and Family Services, the Manitoba government introduced legislation that would end a lawsuit by former kids in foster care over the province clawing back a portion of each child's so-called baby bonus money each month. The practice went on from 2010 to 2019. In 2018, 8 child welfare agencies filed suit against Manitoba, saying it never should have taken that money, and $266 million is owed to those children. Corey Sheffman, an Indigenous rights lawyer who practices in Ontario and Manitoba, is here to explain. Corey, thanks for being with us. Before we get to the bill, can you explain to our audience why Manitoba was taking the children's special allowance from these kids in care and what it was used for?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The Manitoba government says that they were using it in order to supplement CFS budgets, but we don't really know that. I mean, there are some people say that it was just going into general revenue. The government certainly took the position that it was being used to help support child services. All we do know is that it wasn't going to its intended purpose, which was to actually care for the children that the amounts were being paid for.
So now 8 child welfare agencies are suing the government on behalf of these children, saying $266 million should be returned from the children it was taken from. While this is before the courts, the government comes up with this bill. So what are your thoughts on this tactic?
Well, they're not going to be suing the government for very long, unfortunately, because What the government has essentially done is they have legislated themselves out of a liability, out of a court case. Wouldn't it be nice if, we could all steal, and it wouldn't be nice, but I mean, what the government has essentially done is stolen from children and then made a retroactive law saying you can't sue us for stealing from children. That's what's happening here. Not only does this law create what we call a legal fiction, that is, it's something that doesn't exist, but the law tells us we're supposed to pretend exists. So the law does that by essentially backdating the funds, and then it actually specifically names 2 court cases, the ones you mentioned, and says, oh yeah, and by the way, these court cases have to be thrown out, even if the judge were to say that they were justified.
So if the legislation is passed, where does this leave the children who lost this money while they were in care through no fault of their own?
Well, and, I think we have to keep in mind that it's the government is going to do what the government of Manitoba has continuously done under NDP and Conservative governments, which is to prioritize their own interests over the interests of children. And we're not just talking about children generally, because there is a racism aspect of this too. 90% of children in care in Manitoba are Indigenous. And so when the Manitoba government says you can't sue us to get back the money we stole, to get justice, Manitoba is taking a racist position as well.
Corey, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you joining us to speak about this. Corey Sheffman, lawyer based in Toronto.
Thank you.
Time now for a quick break. But coming up, why eviction notices have gone out to some houseboat owners in Yellowknife.
People were calling me saying that, there's somebody pulling the barge across the bay, so that's how we knew about it. Our people are our eyes and our ears.
Welcome back. The clock is ticking in Yellowknife for houseboats that are in the Yellowknife's Dene traditional territory. Charlotte Moore Jacobs explains how one First Nations group is exercising their treaty rights.
Blaine, what are we looking at here?
We're looking at a map of Chief Dragon's territory.
The message from the Yellowknife's Dene First Nation is loud and clear. Houseboaters are not to anchor on the nation's side of Yellowknife Bay. In Deda, Chief Edward Sangrease knows the history.
In the 1950s and 60s, the chief at the time, they made verbal arrangement with the city that nobody's going to establish anything on the east side of the bay. They said that one's going to be for Yellowknife Dene.
On October 2nd, eviction notices were stapled to 3 houseboats and 2 barges. A few days prior, the First Nation released a statement saying they would not stand for the unauthorized land and water occupancy within the Yellowknife's Dene traditional cheap dry geese asserted community area.
People were calling me saying that, there's somebody pulling the barge across the bay, so that's how we knew about it. Our people are our eyes and our ears, so we, give them notice that you're not supposed to be on this side, so maybe they didn't know the protocol before.
This illustrates the off-limits areas for unauthorized residents. For now. Since 2018, the City of Yellowknife has been negotiating a land boundary change, which would see the area where many houseboats reside given back to YKDFN.
We're just on the final stages of, finalizing it. There's just 1 or 2 questions and discussion need to be had. One has been Jollof Island. If we have the agreement, then we know, the fate of the houseboaters.
The city says while they've never had jurisdiction over the water, they've been busy ironing out the fine details on co-managing the sites within the proposed new boundary.
how are we going to work out some of the details around this? So examples including co-management around the Wendake site. We know that's a very important site for the Yellowknives. It's also a place where we have a city pump house where the start of the water intake that brings all of the raw water that is treated to everyone in Yellowknife, Detta, and Delo.
For Chief Sangrease, it's a matter of upholding protocol and respecting the work done by past leaders like his dad.
He taught us to assert our Aboriginal rights, ensure that the land and resources are kept in place and that they are kept safe. And
Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife, Chief Dry Geese Territory.
Time to step aside for another quick break, and then we'll look at how the tourism industry in the Yukon has been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic.
The minute they announced that all the borders are going to be closed, we had cancellation after cancellation after cancellation.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This photo was sent to us from viewer Sheldon Bercier, taken in Thunder Hill between Swan River and Benito, Manitoba. Thanks, Sheldon. You can send us your photos and we might get them on our photo of the day. Here's how you can send them to us. You can email your pictures to share@aptn.ca and we'll do our best to get them on the air. Time now for a look at your Wednesday weather forecast. Starting out on the east coast, 18 with showers for Halifax, 13 and sunny in St. John's, 8 in Nain with rain, 6 and showers in Kuujjuaq, 15 in Montreal, 11 with showers for Saguenay, 17 in Toronto, sunny, and 15 for Ottawa, 9 with showers in Thunder Bay, showers and 7 in Sioux Lookout, 5 with the chance of snow for Churchill, 3 in God's Lake, 8 and rain for Winnipeg and Gimli, 6 in Barons River, 5 for Regina, 4 with showers in Saskatoon, -2 and snow for Uranium City and Stony Rapids. Over in northern Alberta, -1 in high levels, 0 for Fort McMurray, 8 with a chance of snow in Medicine Hat, 4 and partly cloudy in Edmonton, 15 in Vancouver, showers and 16 for Victoria, 0 in Fort Nelson, 8 in Smithers, -12 for Old Crow, 4 with the chance of rain in Whitehorse, -2 in Fort Liard and Trout Lake, 3 below in Yellowknife. Snow and -7 for Sax Harbor, snow and 3 below in Paulatuck. +1 with snow for Baker Lake and Arviette. -3 and snow in Resolute, 6 below in Arctic Bay. It's been a devastating year for tourism in the Yukon this summer. With access to the territory limited, its second biggest industry is struggling to adjust to a pandemic world. Indigenous tourism operators have not been spared, and many have had to put their businesses on pause for the rest of the year. But despite the uncertainty, some are holding out hope that better days are coming. Here's APTN's Sarah Connors.
Fishwheel Charters is closing up for the season. By now, the Indigenous boat tour in Dawson City should have seen as many as 800 tourists. But thanks to COVID-19, tour operator Don Kassoon says this year has been unlike any other.
I would call it disastrous.
Kassoon and her partner, Tommy Taylor, are feeling the effect of border closures and have lost 75% of their revenue.
The minute they announced that all the borders are going to be closed, we had cancellation after cancellation after cancellation that we have people pre-book two years ahead. This year we had 15 people.
Maybe half a mile in, and that's where I take the tourists and that.
James Allen is the former chief of Champagne and Ajax First Nation. He now operates Shakatun Wilderness Camp with his wife in Hangs Junction. He says they'd receive up to 50 visitors from all over the world each year, but not this year.
Well, I haven't seen any tourists, actually.
For a fairly new business still trying to get off the ground, Alan says navigating through the pandemic has been challenging.
Starting off a business is pretty shaky, especially out here. We're not in the mainstream, and people have to drive out to my place, and it's hard to find.
Harmony Hunter is a tourism officer for Yukon First Nations Tourism and Culture. Though no Indigenous businesses have officially closed, she says this past season has been unprecedented.
Some businesses are taking a pause, and so they've shut down operations for the summer, but are planning taking a minute. They're out on the land, they're being with their families.
And it's not just the Yukon that was hit hard by COVID-19. 32,000 Indigenous tourism employees lost their job this year, and 1,140 Indigenous tourism businesses closed. And the expected GDP loss for this year in this industry is $1.4 billion. In spite of the economic hardships, for some operators like Alan, the pandemic has been a time to build much-needed infrastructure.
We have the camp all electrified right now, so that this COVID-19 has given us a break to be able to do those things.
Both tour companies have received government and territorial grants to keep them afloat, like the $25,000 non-repayable development stimulus grant for Indigenous businesses. Don Kassoon says these grants have been a lifesaver.
Even if little grants here and there, help us survive, help us pay for our insurance so then we can continue running the boat tour, every little dollar helps. We're not looking for a handout, but we're looking for a hand up.
And while it's too early to say what next year will look like, James Allen says he's willing to play the hand that he's dealt.
My philosophy is whatever is dealt, I play the cards. I don't worry too much because I'm past that stage anyhow in life.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
An all-new episode of Face to Face is coming up right after the news. Award-winning Cree filmmaker Tasha Hubbard is our guest. Her films often deal with colonial racism, including within the ranks of law enforcement.
I mean, how many, deaths have happened for Indigenous people and people of color for wellness checks, family members calling because they're worried about their loved one and they come and kill them. There's a real problem. And, as we remember, the head of the RCMP and the head of the Alberta Detachment deny that there's systemic racism or say they don't know what it means. And that's not acceptable. That wasn't acceptable in 1873. It's not acceptable now.
And that episode is just minutes away. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.